Good morning everyone. Basa na tayo na ating libro guys. Today is 04 December 2022. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. History of the Filipino People Part 2 pa rin tayo. The Spanish Period. Topic number 7. Resistance against Spanish Rule. Paragraph. Tingnan ko lang guys kung anong paragraph ha. Consequences of fragmented resistance. Basa. Consequences of fragmented resistance, revolts, and peasant outbursts of violence were the principal actions engaged by the Filipinos to protest their economic exploitation and social degradation. However, varied the extent and duration of these rebellions, their causes and development remained basically the same, occurring at an average of 1 every 4 or 5 years. These revolts were usually participated in by disaffected Filipinos, which in some cases numbered by the thousands. The Spaniards suppressed most of these movements with ruthless severity, but the abuses and malpractices of the Spaniards, which continued unabated, forged more revolts, which increased in intensity and scope as the Spaniards approached the end of the regime in the 19th century. Pero po guys, nag-umpisa sila ng 15th century tapos ng 19th century. So, ibig sabihin 400. The Spaniards possessed not only a superior military technology and strategy, but they also employed native volunteer or mercenary soldiers from one part of the country to suppress the rebels in another. The geographical unity was effected through the establishment of a centralized form of government during the early part of the Spanish regime. The colonial masters, particularly the priors, nevertheless kept the natives hopelessly divided and ignorant. By employing the classic principle to divide and rule, they reinforced the tribalistic and regionalistic tendencies of the Filipino people. They further weakened Filipino resistance by the simple expedient of giving concessions to native chieftains and rulers. Thus, due to the lack of unity and leadership, the revolts failed to sensitize the people to a new spectrum of common identities and purposes. Until 1896, the Spaniards numbered no more than 5,000 in the Philippines, yet despite this scarcity in numbers, they were able to maintain Spanish sovereignty in the colony. It was not military superiority or effective colonial rule which would have necessitated hundreds of bureaucrats, but the presence of the clergy that kept the natives in docile and abject submission. The priors successfully conditioned the Filipino minds into accepting the existing arrangements of power and authority in society, and through non-military but certainly more effective weapons of repression, such as threats of revoke, excommunication, and interdict, wielded great influence and exacted obedience from the Filipinos, especially in instances when native recalcitrants threatened Spanish supremacy in the Philippines. Belated development of Philippine nationalism. Cause: nationalism, or devotion to or advocacy of national unity and independence, is the most important prerequisite to the formation of national consciousness, indeed the sine qua non to the development of the national identities. It is a feeling developed in a people living within a contiguous geographic area, a sentiment forged by a common history, language, and literature, customs, and traditions, and even by a common religion. As a historical development, it is a relatively new concept, a product of the ferment and political upheavals of the 18th century and a child of the French Revolution, which was exported to other nations of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, and later by war and commerce by colonialism itself. Ito ba yung Napoleon Bonaparte ba yun? Wait lang guys which was exported to other nations of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars and later by war and commerce by colonialism itself to other parts of the world. In the history of colonized and exploited peoples all over the world, no significant struggle for liberation and independence ever succeeded in making any headway without the earlier development of nationalism among the people involved in the movement. No such sentiment existed in the Philippines before this 19th century. To be sure, the different ethnic groups in the country share the same basic elements of nationalism, such as similarities in racial and cultural features, but Spanish colonial policy was well asserted natural barriers retarded development of nationalistic feeling among the Filipinos. The insular and mountainous character of Filipino geography limited social contact and communication. The dismal state of transportation and communication facilities rendered their natural barriers much more formidable. Moreover, the Spanish medieval practice requiring nasa kabilang page na kasi. Ulit ha. Moreover, the Spanish medieval practice of requiring passports for travel from one province to another, virtually strange region from one another. O social naman noong araw. Province lang pupuntahan mo, di passport pa gamit guys. So, tingnan mo. Requiring passports for travel from one province to another, virtually strange regions from one another. The Filipinos in different parts of the country therefore failed to realize the similarities of their grievances and existence of a common source of suffering and misery. Kasi yung passport natin ngayon guys, ginagamit lang yan pag travel abroad ka. Pero kung nasa within Philippines area ka lang naman, wala ng passport. Pero ito nung araw, province lang pupuntahan, may passport pa. Okay, alitin ko lang ha. Moreover, the Spanish medieval practice of requiring passports for travel from one province to another, virtually strange regions from one another. The Filipinos in different parts of the country therefore failed to realize the similarities of their grievances and the existence of a common source of suffering and misery. Linguistic differences and the absence of a common language aggravated by the deliberate refusal of the Spaniards to propagate the Spanish language weighed heavily in fomenting regionalism and prevented the people from developing a national language that would have unified them. Mahaba-haba yata itong siguro putulin na lang natin kung anong later tayo. Dito tayo sa Filipino nationalism. Contributory factors, the emergence of Filipino nationalism came as the culmination of a long process set in motion by Spanish misrule and exploitation, hastened by political and economic developments in Philippines and Europe. The transformation of the Philippine economy into a raw material market for Europe unavoidably brought the Filipinos in touch with the intellectual tradition of the West, particularly those liberal and revolutionary ideas that had earlier changed the the face of Europe. Improved economic conditions broke down the walls of isolation among the Filipinos and increased their contact with the outside world. Letter A. Opening of the Philippines to international trade. Siguro hanggang letter A lang muna tayo. Bukas na yung B. Letter A. Opening of the Philippines to international trade. The opening of several ports in the Philippines between 1834 and 1873 stimulated the commercial cultivation of certain export crops for the world market. The application of increased capital, including British and American and scientific techniques to agricultural production and the increasing demand for these products brought prosperity to hit her to sequestered colony. Some Filipinos, mostly Spanish and Chinese half-breeds or mestizos, shared in this prosperity, and as a result of their participation in economic activities of the colony, either as owners of lands which produced an export crop or an import-export merchants and middlemen, comoradores. Middleman is comoradores. Open close parenthesis siya, comoradores. Became the Filipino middle class. The growth of commerce and industry therefore fostered the alteration of the native social hierarchy, with the principalia or the political and social aristocracy constituting the upper class. Ulit guys. The growth of commerce and industry therefore fostered the alteration of the native social hierarchy, with the principalia or the political and social aristocracy constituting the upper class, the masses which occupy the lowest rung of the social ladder, and the new middle class intermediate between these two classes. The term middle class, however, as applied to this emergent stratum in Filipino society, differs in meaning and significance from that of the European middle class, or for that matter, the bourgeoisie. 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 I don't know how to pronounce it. The Prince for bourgeoisie in time as economic developments in the Philippines. Prince nga di ba? Kaya hindi ko mabigkas ng mabuti guys. In time as economic developments in the Philippines would demonstrate the thin dividing line between the principalia and the middle class would disappear almost completely. Progress in agriculture and commerce, far from turning out to be of real benefit to the people brought. Basahin niyo rin yung inyong guys. Pare-pareho naman tayo ng libro nito eh. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Okay. Progress in agriculture and commerce, far from turning out to be of real benefit to the people, brought even greater hardships upon them, while the expansion of foreign commerce stabilized the colonial economy and brought immense profits to the upper classes. It served merely to sharpen the suffering of the people for the condition perpetuating poverty among the masses. Usurious money lending, arbitrary land rental increases, etc. remain unchanged. The prosperity that came to the colony therefore was actually non-distributive, for it did not seep into the lower classes of society. Nevertheless, the improvement in transportation and communication facilities required by increased foreign trade brought the Filipinos closer to one another and gave them opportunities to realize their universal plight. The opening of Suez Canal and the consequent shortening of the road between the Philippines and Europe enabled many Europeans of liberal orientation to come to the Philippines and come into contact with some Filipinos who had been educated in Europe. Ideas as well as works of well-known liberal thinkers and philosophers trickled into the colony. Letter B, Rise of the Middle Class. Bukas na to guys. Bye everyone. God bless.